So after months of agitations, protests, threats of chaos, finally, the new voters register is set to be compiled beginning tomorrow. It has divided the country right through the middle, those who support it and those who do not. I have hardly come across a neutral person in this debate. But the road to the commencement of the voters register, as you well know, has been fraught with many challenges, legal ones. Final one decided by the Supreme Court just last week. One knocked off by the High Court just today. Today we've heard from the President, the Commander-in-Chief of the country. We've heard from the Chairperson of the Electoral Commission herself. And the EC says they are ready to commence with the voter registration exercise. The President says he has no intention to rig the polls. He's talked about the deployment of the military to the border towns, which has caused a fair measure of controversy, particularly in the voter region. We've had the NDC today as well warn that the way the process has been handled so far only means one thing, that there is a grand plan to rig the elections. There's a lot that has happened leading to this point, but it appears very clearly that the process to register new voters for the 2020 elections will go ahead tomorrow. So in the midst of all this controversy, the Electoral Commission Chairperson said today that we must find a way to move forward. That is the subject of our show tonight. That is what PM Express is going to delve into tonight. How do we exactly move forward with a registration exercise that will be inclusive and not exclude people, that will not disenfranchise people, but get as many people who are qualified to register to get onto the register so they can vote? The legal implications are clear, but how do you implement them in the next 1 month to ensure that eventually we'll have a free, fair, but most importantly, peaceful elections? My guests will join me via Zoom after this break. Thank you again for staying with me here on PM Express, and thank you for welcoming me into your homes from my home, live on the PM Express on the JoyNews channel. My guest joining me via Zoom tonight is Dr. Kojo Pumpuni-Asante. He's a Director of Advocacy and Policy Engagements at the Center for Democratic Development, the CDD, Ghana. Also joining me is Franklin Kojo. He is a founding president and CEO of Imani Center for Policy and Education. We also will be joined later by Dr. Siribo Kweku, who is a director of electoral services at the Electoral Commission. And I'm delighted to say that also from the Institute for Democratic Governance, IDEG, also joining us tonight is Ewald Kwega, who is a research fellow with IDEG. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time here on PM Express. Dr. Kojo Asante, let me start with you. I don't know if you managed tonight to listen in to the President's national address on the eve of the commencement of the voter registration exercise tomorrow. If you did, I would love to hear what your initial thoughts are on that particular address and its significance on the eve of such an important exercise.
Well, thank you, and good evening to your viewers and your listeners. No, unfortunately I couldn't catch it, but I've seen some infographics capturing sort of the salient points. I think from what I've read, the president was really trying to encourage people to prepare to exercise their franchise as directed by the Constitution, and reminding them the importance of doing that. And also, I think, trying to address concerns about, why there is a pursuit of the democratic process in the vigorous manner in which it has been pursued in the midst of a pandemic. And he was trying to draw people's attention that basically we are trying to do it to make sure we don't have a constitutional crisis. So I think it was basically simple, straightforward, just reminding people of their constitutional obligations and the importance of ensuring the continuity of the state, but also reminding them or explaining why the decision was taken to still ensure that these processes are pursued or implemented, and just remind people that they should still observe the protocol so that everything can go well, and of course try and avoid further spread of the COVID-19. So if that was what really captured, that's most of the things I saw on infographics, then maybe I think it was a basic sort of address and nothing spectacular about it.
Yes, let me bring in Mr. Franklin Cudjoe. Mr. Franklin Cudjoe, going into tomorrow, one of the biggest controversies had been that the system has some way been hijacked and it's been manipulated to benefit the president some way electorally. He today was categorical that he has no plan to rig the elections, and he is clearly for a free and fair elections, and he is committed to, I guess, as a government, and he leads a government, ensure that the process is free and fair, but also inclusive. How important was it that he, on the eve of the elections, came out the way he did to address these very vexatious matters, would you say?
Evans, Franklin will just be fine. But thank you very much for this opportunity, and good evening to my fellow panel members and viewers as well. I think it was important for the president to make that statement. I mean, I suspect it would have come from any president at all who, prior to the process for voting, had witnessed one of the most tumultuous, if you like, preparations towards it, and where the political opponents have been making all kinds of permutations to suggest that he's complicit or his party is complicit in the chaos that, of course, that led to all this process. He has his right, and his right to discard those notions. No, I mean, of course, even on the eve of the vote, on the eve of the registration. So no one can begrudge the president when he makes those comments. I think that it is within his rights to say so. But as to whether opponents may have been convinced, that's another matter.
Yeah, and that is a big, great unknown. And this, we'll get to see all this play out tomorrow, whether or not people believe him. And that's why I want to bring in Ewald with IDEG. Ewald, tell me, also speaking today, there were two national addresses today. The president's was the last, but earlier we've heard from Madame Jean Mensa as well. Now, one of the things she said today was that, yes, we've had the legal challenges that the Supreme Court has been definite on, and that it was time to move forward. That was such an important point for her to make. Knowing what you know as the research fellow at IDEG, was Jean Mensa hitting the right notes when he looked beyond the challenges to reassuring that they are doing this process so that the elections on December 7 is credible, which is really the main argument of the Electoral Commission?
Okay, good evening, Evans, and good evening to your listeners. I actually missed out on Jean Mensah's presentation, but if I can take it from what you just said, I think it's a very important. She came out kind of giving assurance or assuring the public, because if you look at the context of what has happened before the Supreme Court decision, where the whole thing about the COVID came around, everybody was kind of worried whether we were really going to go into the elections or we're really going to, push it forward. Just like other African countries have tried to push it forward. And then when it came to the issue about the voters register, we all saw the disagreements between the NDC, the EC, and also the MPP on this issue. So there was so much public anxiety about all that was happening. And even if you look back as to the vigilante activity that we experienced in 2019, there was some form of anxiety and concern within the public. And therefore, I think Jean Mensah coming forward to assure the public to look beyond the Supreme Court decision, which some would say have kind of divided those who lost as against those who won. I think it's important that we do some form of confidence building. We try to build consensus, which I think that's what she was trying to do. So I think that is the way forward. That is the way forward. If indeed we want our democracy to be strengthened, we need to look at how we can build consensus. In spite of whoever lost or won at the Supreme Court at this time, we need to work together for Mother Ghana. Hello, Evans.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Santi, that's a big question. And let's begin to unpack tomorrow. So going into tomorrow, did the Supreme Court for you settle all the concerns that you had? And I've heard you raise some of them before. Did that settle for you all the concerns you had about the compilation of the new voters register? If it did not, what concerns do you still have going into tomorrow?
Well, I think, beyond, what the legal position is that the Supreme Court, tried to deal with, I think a lot of the bigger challenges is really more practical. It's really about election administration. So, the Supreme Court really dealt with broad principles, affirming the right to vote, affirming certain rights of citizenship, affirming due process, that if the EC takes exercises discretion and is done with due process, it's not done arbitrary and so on, then basically the EC's, you cannot interfere with the EC's work. It didn't really deal with, substantive issues as to whether the decisions that the EC does take can be deemed to affect other rights, the right to vote, which itself the EC is trying to protect. So it didn't really get into those kind of substantive issues. But, at this point, we have to wait for the reasoning to get into that. But as I said, the most important things are practical. So basically, the key thing for me is even basic understanding of what is supposed to take place tomorrow when a prospective registrant goes to the registration center. Remember, the last time we did this was sometime in 2012. So a lot of people have forgotten what exactly they're supposed to do when they get there. So you see the form for the first time, and there are all kinds of questions that you have to respond to, right? So because we have lost a lot of time, we've not managed to really do a lot of education. And so tomorrow we will basically be doing the education even as the process is going on. And one of the bigger issues around going to be the guarantee system, which for the first time, I insist that for the first time, is we are going to have to use the guarantee system in the majority for a big registration of voters like we've done. We have done it in the past. The EC have made the point that it's been used extensively for limited voter registration. But that's understandable because first-time voters, they will come with their parents, they will come with maybe their big brother and so on and so forth. But now you're talking about a huge number between 8 million and 10 million people who are adults. Some are, in the various, who have to bring people if they don't have the Ghana card or the passport for people to come and register with, for them or vote for them. So that whole process, how the process is challenged, that education is very, very, very important because you don't want people literally just insisting that, this person is not, or find people who are contractors who come and say, we are registering for people. For example, if I am registered in a different polling station, or I am a registrant in a different polling station, can I go to another polling station to go and vouch for somebody? Because the idea of vouching is community-based. You know people that live in the community, so you can really say that, these people are Ghanaians. But can I move from Accra and go to Brong-Ahafo to go and vouch for somebody, or it has to be within my voting my voting center? So those are really practical communication things and clarity that we have to be getting from the EC so that it doesn't cause confusion. The other thing I worry about is, for example, when there's disruption due to rain, and we're going to have a few of those issues happening when the rains come. When they take the forms away, where are they supposed to go and keep them? How do you, so that people don't say, oh no, they are taking them away to go and register some people and so on and so forth. So all of these things are more practical things, and that's the more of those things I want to hear the EC talk about and give clarity so that it prepares people's minds about some of these little things that can degenerate into conflict and confusion.
Mr. Cudjoe, do you share Dr. Sante's concerns there?
Well, overwhelmingly, yes. I've just been looking with consternation as to how the whole process has been shepherded. And I have no sympathies at all for anybody who goes through the process and then has to be visited with all manner of issues. I mean, I don't know how you want to ensure some certainty that people who are ineligible should not get onto the roll, but you are ready to make room for close to 8 million persons who could be vouched for. And as Dr. Santi has suggested, I mean, the whole process of even vouching for people can become a business in itself. I mean, people will be crisscrossing the country and vouching for people. What are the protocols to either prevent someone from vouching? Are the centers coded in such a way that if I'm in Lolobi South and I am coded maybe D1, I can move to Huyasim in the same district and then go and vouch for someone? That would take me about 20 minutes of driving, but I could still do that. I mean, and the vice versa. Is it possible for that to happen? First of all, let's not make the argument to suggest that we are baiting or waiting for bad news. The fact of the matter is that bad news is actually going to stare you in the face when you haven't organized yourself properly. And so I shudder to think that the process would be without problems. And of course, there are problems with every process, just that this one is just one big organized chaos. And maybe I shouldn't say more because I have a very unneutral position. Which was supposedly affirmed by some judges who suggested that because I'm not neutral, I couldn't comment on the very wide discretionary powers that the EC has, including this rather arcane process of certifying who is a Ghanaian to vote. And I shudder to think once more that I draw the analogy of the Ghana police which decides that when they wake up and decide that there should be an ally to ask motorist witnesses, people who have not driven before, two of them to come and vouch for persons who want to get licenses to drive. I mean, if you be safe on the roads, then that is your own matter. I mean, like I say, I do not want to sound as if like a broken record, but I wish them well, basically. That's what I've got to say. And I wish everybody who stand in line to go through all the process well as well.
I mean, Dr. Sante, let's stay with this issue about the vouching. Today, when the EC chairperson addressed the nation, she took some time to provide us the evidence to show what has happened in previous registration exercises. And in cataloging the many registration exercises we've had in the last few years, the evidence she put forward seemed to suggest that vouching for people as Ghanaians to get on the voters register has possibly been the dominant mode of registration. In fact, he says, for example, in the 2019 limited registration exercise, up as much as 95.2% of people registered using the guarantor system. I mean,
Jesus,
isn't that, I guess, the evidence, I guess, what supports the EC to be very confident to even expand it? I mean, if it's been a norm in our previous registration exercises, why can't it be so now in another registration exercise?
Okay, first of all, let me express my view about the guarantee system. I think, first of all, nobody can persuade me that the guarantee system is a much more superior way of identifying or affirming somebody's citizenship than a birth certificate or baptism card or any of those things. I think it's just a bad idea. We have used it in elections over the years, and I'll come to the statistics around that, but I just want to put that on the table. It's something I disagree with the EC. And actually, if you take the other analogy, which is, the EC's own determination to try to get away from the manual verification system, so that it brought in facial recognition, it's the same idea, because these things are subject, it becomes susceptible to fraud, all right, because people can collude and basically say, yes, we identify this person as a Ghanaian. I just read yesterday, I think Ace and Kuma kind of listed all the different ways in which somebody can obtain citizenship in Ghana, and it's many different ways. So there's no way anybody can persuade me that just two people, registered voters, saying that somebody is a Ghanaian is a much more superior way of identifying. But that's what we have. So let me deal with the statistics. Yes, it's true that the 2019, at least according to the EC statistics, I haven't seen the source document, but I trust the EC to put out accurate information. But that was a limited voter registration, which was registering 1.5 million, or I think 1.9 million, if I remember, where you are mostly dealing with first-time voters. And as I've said, those ones tend to be easier because these are young people. They will probably come with their parents and so on and so forth. Now you are talking about the entire register. And from the statistics that we have gotten from the Ghana card, the NIA, and what we know about passports, as I said, you are talking about between 8 million. I've heard the EC even say it's probably lower than that, it's 6 million and so on. But that is a far cry from 1.5 million, right? So yes, the EC may be confident about all of that, but what we are saying is that we have to pay attention, because CODEO has tracked the issue about the guarantor system for many years, and it's always contentious, particularly in border areas and particularly in competitive seats, where it is not only about the presidential election, it's also about the parliamentary election. And the game is about getting your supporters onto the voter register. So if you have a competitive seat where the difference is about 1,000, it makes it, sensible for you to try to get what you believe to be your supporter base onto the register. And that's where people get into the contracting and so on, and the parties will mobilize to make sure that they are getting people registered for a particular constituency. And that's where you get people, try to repel it or contest it and so on. So for me, there are challenges in terms of, at the end, what kind of register we have. But I am confident that once we get past this election, obviously what will have to happen is for the NIA to complete its exercise. And then we can really begin to get the register, properly cleaned up so that we can push towards the credible register that we have. But going into tomorrow and the days coming, I just want to, it's not to be the purveyor of bad news. I mean, this work, you always just anticipate. And the EC people will tell you themselves, they plan, they anticipate challenges. So it's all about public communication so that the individuals who are going to participate understand what the rules are, whether they like it or not, so that when issues come, they can resolve it very easily.
I'm not so optimistic, Dr. Asante. I think that Evans, I know you wanted to call me first, or maybe go to your word. Yeah, I was of the view that I'm not too optimistic. I think after this election, when power changes hands one day, someone else will come up with another reason to change the register. You see, there's so much counterintuitiveness in the whole process that leading to this registration. I mean, if you suggest that limited registration gave you 95% of people who were vouched for, then what was the sense in asking us to even go and register for NIA cards and their passports? Then just allow everybody to vouch for everybody, because 95% confidence level is really high for vouching. You see, these were the very things we were trying to prevent with our amicus, but of course, that's history. And so for me, I just see organized mess throughout, and I'm sorry. I don't trust those figures that they were putting out, that limited registration gave 95% vouching capabilities. Why is all that data? And you see, this is part of the problem we have with the EC. Every now and then they conjure some explanation when they have their backs against the wall. It's worrying. And so, as I said, I don't want to sound like a broken record. Our positions are known. We are anti the whole machinations that led to this process. Machinations, I mean, I should use a better word. Confusion that has created this and the whole process. As I said, I can only wish them well and wish everybody who goes to register it properly in peace. But obviously, there'll be a lot more persons who will be vouched for. And then that discredits the whole register, because what's the point, as Dr. Asante has said, when there are very valid means of ensuring that people would register, but rather now being reduced to what other persons will say, witnesses they call them. Were they witnesses at birth, or they were witnesses to persons who had come to live in the community? It just doesn't gel. But anyway, as I said again, I wish everybody well in the registration process.
I mean, I'm going to take a break. When I return, I will look at the central question of the identification document. We talk about the guarantor. I mean, but remember that we are only talking about the guarantor system, which has been increased and expanded because of the limitations on what you can actually show as an ID card to get registered, which is the Ghana card and a passport. And also ask a fundamental question about, I mean, both the president and the EC addressed this, that the process must not disenfranchise people, but should be inclusive. We know what it is. Guarantor system is going to be used. It begs the question, are the identification documents that we have that people are going to use tomorrow enough? And then the key question also about preventing violence is also very key tomorrow as this begins. We'll talk about that also. And some of the key things that Imani themselves had picked up in terms of the practicalities of doing this in the midst of COVID-19? And how many people exactly could we respectfully and reasonably say, if we get onto the voters register, we could say that yes, whatever outcome that we get on December 7 will be a legitimate outcome? I mean, can we even get substantial numbers on the voters register at this time? All these challenges we'll look at when we return from the break. Stay with us. And thank you for staying with us here on PM Express. My guest, Dr. Kojo Asante, he is the Director of Advocacy and Policy Engagement at the CDD. Also with me is Franklin Kojo, founding President and CEO of Imani Center for Policy and Education. Ewald Kwe Ga is Research Fellow, Institute for Democratic Governance, IDEG. We had arranged and the EC had agreed to be represented. We had spoken to Dr. Srebo Kweku, who had agreed to speak to us, but we're unable to reach him currently. And so, of course, we would still have the civil society take on the issues of course, all of us will be expected to participate in tomorrow with the registration exercise commencing in EC district offices across the country. Ewald, let me come to you. I mean, as a research fellow with IDEG, I mean, in spite of the concerns that have been raised by everybody else, including the cases that have gone to court, this process is starting tomorrow. I wonder, though, that's the architecture that has been put in place for this registration exercise beginning tomorrow. Is it inclusive, or will it lead to disenfranchisement of people? What's your own assessment? What's your verdict on that very essential question?
Yeah, that's a question that I think we should all be thinking about and seeing how best we can address some of the challenges. Obviously, I think there are some challenges that clearly the EC has not been able to, respond to. An example is we are using a Ghana card, which process is not completed. Basically, a lot of Ghanaians don't have it. The other means of identification is the passport. Obviously, a lot of people don't have it. It basically shows that a lot of people are not going to be able to register. And then the proposal is that people have to guarantee for people. So what about a community where the people don't have a passport, no one has a passport, and also no one has the Ghana card? Who guarantees for them? So that's a vacuum that has been created. What about people who are in isolation or have been quarantined because of COVID-19? What about Ghanaians who have just traveled and as a result of COVID-19, the borders have been closed and they cannot come back to the country? So there are a lot of issues. Like Franklin and Kojo said, the most inclusive would have been a birth certificate. But as we speak now, it's not inclusive. Now, you also mentioned the issue about preventing violence. And as we are aware, if you go to the Volta region and the Oti and some parts of the northern region, where the places which are perceived to be the stronghold of opposition, you have a lot of security men who have been sent to that place. It also raises it creates a tense environment. There's a lot of intimidation, and I was following the news today on your channel, and people were expressing fear. I don't think that's the way we want to go. If we indeed this process is to be inclusive and violence-free, I think we should try and encourage people to come out and register. But we should not be parading the security in a manner that we have not done before. So I think the EC needs to look at some of these. And also to address this inclusive problem, there's also the need for the EC to try to build consensus, particularly between the NDC and the NPP, to call their people out to register. Anything that is kind of creating fear in the public's mind has to be addressed. For instance, we also talk about COVID-19. how are we dealing with it? A lot of people are afraid and they don't want to go out because of COVID-19. What are we doing about this? So there are a lot of questions that I think we all need to come together and see how we can address. And I was asking my colleague panelists, for instance, if by 6th of August, most eligible voters are not able to come out to register, or we are unable to get registered, will the EC extend the deadline for registration in consideration of the fact that we also have a very tight deadline, and in case we miss any of the processes after the registration, we may have a constitutional crisis. So I think we are, I don't know how to put it, but we are in a very challenging situation, and I think all stakeholders should come together so that we see how we can manage through this water. Otherwise, if it gets out of hand, I think we would all be affected.
I mean, Dr. Sante, a very important question that we need to consider here. I haven't heard the EC as of now set a target in terms of how many people they hope to register in the next 1 month. If you have, please correct me. But it begs the question, how many people must a voter register have for that register to count as representative and a legitimate base document for an election?
I think the EC is looking at I think 18 million, if I'm correct, because the last figure we had, I think, was what, 15 million, and 16 million.
Yeah, 16 million.
And we had
16.8 million.
15.8 million, and we had a turnout of, I think, 11 point something million, right, of people voting. All right. Normally, the international standard is 50% of the adult. The adult population is estimated to be around 50%, but there's always a plus and minus there because you have to look at your demographics. So for example, in our case, we have about 57% of the population under 24. But if you look at the adult population within that, it will probably be maybe about 10% of that 57% will be the adult population. So if you kind of estimate it, you are still talking about 50%. And that's why when people see a register that has, 60% of the population on it, people worry that it's bloated, and that could be dead people and, underage voters and so on and so forth. In our case, it's always very easy to get underage voters because of the big demographic bracket that I talk about, under 24. So normally you get people, particularly when people are 15 years, between 15 and 19, a lot of people can get onto the register because, based on their physiology and so on, they could easily pass for an 18-year-old person. So currently, if you take 18 million, our population is supposed to be about 31 million or so now. So half of that, you should be looking at 60 million or so, right? So if anything, around 70, 80 million, you would think that, okay, you have too many people on the register that probably should not be there. So that's, but there are methods for estimating these things, for also checking whether there are all these discrepancies. We at CDD have tried to do it in the past, but you can never get the register in a CVS format to be able to do those statistical analysis and list to register or register to list kind of methods. So that's something that we still can work on. But all around the world, there's always a lot of people on the register who, as I said, might be dead. And if you don't have a good ID system, you always struggle to really keep a clean and accurate register.
Yeah.
So that's the position that
Dr.
we are
Sante,
currently.
Yeah, just because of time, I want to quickly bring in Franklin. Franklin, 30 seconds, based on what Dr. Sante had just laid out for us, what the standard is. And finally, for you ahead of tomorrow, do you, by any reasonable expectation, expect that we will meet that minimum threshold of people getting onto the register to make the register credible and legitimate to elect our next leader? Very brief, in 30 seconds.
The statistics show that the current rule is about 56% of voter population per national population. It's not an outlier. In Tunisia is doing 63%. Cape Verde is doing 60%. And other African countries, Algeria is doing 55%. There are other countries that are doing 70%. And these are not African countries per se, but they are not outliers at all. So expecting 18 million is feasible, which really defeats the whole argument that the register is bloated. I don't think the science lends credence to that, which was again contained in our amicus brief that was dismissed because the judge was struggling with when Dami made those fictitious claims that the register was bloated. If they had only listened to the brief, they would have seen the demographic analysis done that show that Ghana's voter roll is not bloated.
Okay. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I'm grateful that you could join me. Tomorrow, we'll all have to queue to register. It's our civic duty as people and as citizens. Enjoy the rest of your evening and best of luck to all concerned. Bye-bye from my home.